Greetings and salutations. This is Hyberlisk. Top of the morning to you. It's a beautiful Thursday, late morning, as it were, April 7th, 2022. And I thought I'd get started on this series that I've been meaning to work on here and finally get it off the assembly line, out of my head. Instead of just saying, oh yeah, I'll do it later, I'll do it today. At any rate, the build of the game that I'll be playing with today is though 1.12.1, and I've decided I look back at the other content that I had made for the other attempt of a video series that I made, and I wasn't particularly pleased with how it ended up. I had a problem with the audio later on in the video, and not so good. So hopefully today's audio balance will be significantly better. I've done some research and fiddling, and I think I have everything set okay. But I also was thinking a lot about how I wanted to present the video series in general, and from a little bit of the feedback from some of my kind friends that humbled me and took a look at stuff, I came to the determination that it would be better to start with a brand new clean slate and approach it as if the individuals watching this might be brand new to the series, brand new to Total War in general. For me, Total War has been a series where I've played it on and off a little bit over the years. I always thought the concept was super interesting, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around it the first couple times that I played some of the titles, like the Medieval 1 way back in the day, and then Medieval 2. And it's definitely the era and time period that I was always interested in for playing a game, but it just seemed daunting. Like there was so much to it, and I didn't quite understand the way the mechanics worked for the campaign, the battles, and I had played a bunch of other RTS games and then turn-based strategy games, and I thought a hybrid of the two was a great idea, but it just was overwhelming to me. I was like, it's too much. But I think a friend of mine one day, I'd like purchased there was like some really good sales and titles that I thought might be interesting. Like I think I picked up Shogun 2 one day on Steam, and a friend of mine noticed that I had it on my library, but I didn't have any playtime on it. I think my friend's name was Zach or something like that on Steam. So hi, Zach. And he was patient with me and was like, hey, we should play this together. We'll do a co-op. And he sat through and waited for me to like wrap my head around what I was doing per turn. And it was just a very fun and chill experience. So I thought I might try to help anybody else out there that might be interested in trying to play some of the Total War games and get familiar with how to approach it and break the ice, as it were, overcome some of the hurdles that I had to face myself so that you could become more comfortable with it if you happened to be interested. So a good place to start, I think, would be Total War Warhammer 2. I think it's overall the current best title for a Total War game that's on the market. I played quite a bit of Total War Warhammer 3 and was a little bit disappointed with how it's been going, but then they just released a patch, and the patch has been really good and helped revitalize a lot of it. So fingers crossed that they continue to make improvements and stuff like that, and it all bodes well for the future, for the stuff that's in Total War Warhammer 2. A lot of it carried over from Warhammer 1, and then Warhammer 3 promises to have an opportunity to play everything all together, the Mortal Empires experience, as I'll get into here. But first things first, before really getting into stuff, if you've got all the game installed and everything cool, if you've never run it before for the settings, I do recommend giving it a pass through and taking a look at your video options first. And your defaults might be quite a bit higher than some of these. I brought a lot of these options down much lower than they started off by default. And I could probably run a lot of this at higher settings, but at the same time, it will make my system performance suffer. Like I'll get 60 FPS, maybe even above if I really wanted to push it, and perhaps with higher settings. But then when certain actions happen, my frame rate will drop much lower than 60. So like in the range of 40 to 50. And I just strongly dislike that change in the frame rate. So if you're ever having issues running the game as you're getting into it, when you start up a new round of the game, you might want to go back into this options menu and advanced options and then toggle some of the stuff down and test it on your own. So separate from all of that though, the first reason I would recommend going and doing this before you actually start the game itself is this unit size. I believe the default setting is set to large. And instead of that, I would humbly recommend that Ultra would be the first place to start for unit size. The standard for multiplayer games, I think it's always set to large unit size of, so like if a unit at large has 45 entities, bringing it up to ultra brings it up to 60. So it's a 25 or a 33% increase up to that. So it does have a system performance hit to, like, it takes more processing power and more system internals to run it. But if you can run it everything on large, it's not so much of a difference to go up to ultra for that. And then all these other settings could be toggled down a little bit, and you could get to that. And the reason I would recommend setting stuff to ultra for the unit size is this option here is a lot of the settlements where there's battles and stuff where there's tight terrain, it feels more appropriate to have a larger size unit fit into that size of the space that's available. The battlefields feel like they fit better with ultra unit size. Anything less than that just feels like there's not enough troops to fill gaps, or it just doesn't look right, I guess. And then the tabletop itself, the more troops you had, the better. You know, like, it looks cool to have lots of troops. And then separate from that, those are more of like subjective opinions about it. There's a more objective fact that the spells in the game have much higher efficacy on lower unit size settings. So like even just going down to large, the standard default, spells are exceptionally powerful. And one of the only ways to sort of like trim off some of that power that the spells provide is to bring it up to ultra. And then it gets as bad as things are on large. If you go down to medium and then especially small, some of the spells become incredibly broken and overpowered, where they'll do a lot more than they would on the large or ultra. So it's more about like getting a game feel for. You can set this to anything you want, of course, and yeah, if your system is older or underpowered or something like that, yeah, you could probably bring this down and have a performance increase. But I'm willing to trade off all of these other settings to mostly low and set that to ultra, and I think my game experience is good for it too. And then if through all of these settings you're still having issues running it, if it still seems a little bit laggy, that kind of thing, I would recommend that checking out your video card, whatever video card you're running, if it's NVIDIA or whatever. There should be some sort of setting in a software on your video card's controller or whatever that you can change the frame rate to limit it to a specific cap of frame rate. And there isn't a setting for that anywhere in the Total War Warhammer menus for anything. And yet, yeah, you could do the recommended settings, but I do recommend taking a couple minutes to at least set through some of this stuff once you get into the game. But before you get into a game, the only thing that you can change here that won't be effectable, that you can't change when you're in the game, it won't update it, even though it allows you the option to change it, is this unit size. So that's where I recommend starting here in your options before you even start the game proper, load up a campaign or something like that. So going back in through the other options and stuff, you can fiddle with the sound and stuff. I find that the music can be somewhat distracting sometimes, so I had it off for now, but I'll turn it back on now. It's quite enjoyable, actually, but if you've played the game for hundreds and hundreds, if not maybe thousands of hours, having the audio, having the music on can get maybe a little bit repetitive, in my humble opinion. One other quick stop that I'd recommend before getting fully started into a campaign would be simply going to your controls section. And then for campaign, going down to end turn, the default is to have this as your enter key. And I have simply found that by playing the game and fumbling around, trying to type stuff or hit hotkeys and stuff, if one is back out on the campaign map and accidentally hits the enter key, it ends the turn sometimes when one would not want the turn to be ended. So I would simply recommend here, I even name this as that you can save whatever your hotkey combination is and then reload them up, or if you wanted to change something or something like that. But I just named it safe end turn so that I don't accidentally end my own turn. The default, I think, for most of this stuff is about the same as what we're seeing here. You can change stuff on or off. Like, I think the camera shake is a little bit more distracting than not. That might be a default option that's turned on. If you're prone to motion sickness or something like that, changing some of the stuff like that can help avoid motion sickness and things like that. trying to think if there's anything else pertinent. Well, in these menus, there's some information. So this advanced section doesn't actually allow you to change anything, but it gives you information about some pretty cool, nifty features where you can hold specific modifier keys like Alt and Control and Shift to change how some of the standard functions will work for buttons as you're or different actions as you're taking in the game, and it'll help allow you to control things more readily. And most of this stuff might sound foreign to you if you've never touched any game in this series before, but I assure you that just taking a couple minutes and sort of like reading this, trying to keep it in mind, and then going and testing it yourself. Even when you're in the game, you can bring up this control menu and then review what these things do and get used to it yourself if you'd like to pair it in. I found that some of these, especially holding down Control to select certain things and Alt to have a unit move through different, just great ways to control the game above and beyond what you might be used to for other real-time strategy games or things like that. And then all these other settings, really, you can change what the standard hotkey is to a whole variety of other things. And I've tried to use my mouse as like to set a separate hotkey for this thing, like, and I'm pressing a button on my mouse and it's not actually updating it. So I guess if you're using a mouse, you might have to find some sort of way around it where if you are set on using the mouse as a hotkey for something, you'd have to find some sort of alternative to enable your mouse to be recognized as a separate keyboard press or something like that. Perhaps your mouse on your end has something like that by default, but mine certainly doesn't at the moment. And I would think that it would be useful to have some of these toggleable to hotkey to my mouse, but at the moment I have not figured that out yet. But it's not an essential gameplay feature. You can certainly get around it without using the mouse as much, or perhaps figure out a way to use the mouse more often. But I do highly recommend using a lot of these keyboard shortcuts. You can get away with not using your keyboard for most of it, but I humbly suggest that the keyboard is a very useful tool in conjunction with a lot of these other hotkeys and things like that to make the gameplay experience more fluid or give you better control, more of a nuanced control over everything. Game settings, if you're just starting out, there are some useful advice offerings from the advisor, so that you might want, I think the default might be set to high. As you get more and more used to it, you could perhaps change it down to minimal, or if you've missed stuff for what the advisor was saying and you wanted to like get a better idea of like what was saying, that you can bring up the setting and then hit clear history and it'll restart everything as if you're a brand new player to it again. And then you could change around some of these other settings here. The one I'd recommend is making sure that default run is on. I think most cases you can get around the default guard mode being off. I'd highly recommend against using skirmish mode in all but like 1% of cases. So like 99% of the time you won't want to use skirmish mode and it's bad, but there might be some rare cases where it could be useful. Projectile trails, they're cool. They could be a little bit distracting and break the immersion a little bit, maybe, I don't know. It does make it a little bit easier to see whether or not ranged units are doing their thing and shooting projectiles. So I would recommend it turning on. And then, yeah, you can have like a colorblind mode. So if you have some limitations as to what you're able to see in the light spectrum, you can change around and change some of these settings. And oh, okay, yeah. Different options are available to you that perhaps would help given your specific circumstances. I'd recommend just the default gamma, but this is another option to change around stuff like that too if you find it to be too bright or too dark. So there's a lot of downloadable content for Total War Warhammer, the series in general. Not anything available yet for Warhammer 3, but if things keep the same trend and go well for the series, there will be a whole bunch more to consider. But I would suggest that just playing the base game of Total War Warhammer 2 plus one other thing would be the best way to approach from a new player's perspective. And that one other thing is owning both Warhammer 1 as well as 2. So if you own both Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2, you get access to Mortal Empires. And the Eye of the Vortex campaign is a standard default campaign if you just simply own Warhammer 2. And it's fine. I've played it a little bit on my own, but it's less of a sandbox experience and a little bit different from the way that a lot of the other Total War campaigns have gone for the other titles in the series. Whereas Mortal Empires is like this big giant grand campaign map, and it's awesome. There's so many different races to play on it, and It's a blast, and I think it's the best iteration of a Total War game out there at the moment. I was really into Shogun 2, but it's kind of like a limited to like just Japan, and there aren't that many different factions. Everything felt kind of samey. Where Mortal Empires got, if you're not already aware, there's just a lot of variation and different options and opportunities to play different things in the campaign. So let's get into it. Yeah. So when you just own just the Warhammer 2, you'll have access to a bunch of the Warhammer 2 standard races, but you could gain access if you wanted to purchase the DLCs. Some of them are cheap, some of them are not so cheap. You can gain access to a whole bunch of other things that aren't available from the standard. And then titles from Warhammer 1 stuff can carry over to Warhammer 2. My favorite, though, and the faction, the race that I've played the most of is the Bretonnia. And they're a free faction, so that works out for me to offer it and suggest it to other players here is if you ever wanted to play something in the game, but you didn't want to pay a lot of money, but you happened to own the title, this would be a great option to, like, if you've tried out some of the other races and they weren't gelling for you, there are free things available. And this would be the first place that I'd actually recommend from what I've played of the other races. They feel a little bit different from the other Total War titles, whereas even from, like, say, I think it's broken up in the community and referred to as historical Total War compared to fantasy. So, like, obviously Warhammer universe is all fantasy, but the other titles like Rome and Empire and that they're more based in historical reality of what we've experienced on planet Earth. And this is all fantasy. It's fun. It's Games Workshop. It's yeah. These are totally not, inspired by King Arthur and yeah, good stuff.
My blade is ready.
At any rate, I thought that playing on normal would be a great way to approach for a brand new player, so that you're not feeling like you're going up an uphill battle to face things, but just know that jumping it down to easy or changing it to all the other difficulty settings and stuff here that are available will dramatically affect your gameplay experience. And that if you've never touched such a title, that I would suggest that normal is an appropriate way to play. And if you felt more comfortable with the system, you might feel compelled to bump it up the next time you play to one of the other difficulty settings. But you don't have to play in any way. You like, people out there in the community are pretty insistent that the only way that you're playing the game for real is to play it on legendary, and I don't think that's the case. You can have fun and play the game at your own way and enjoy it at your own pace. And I've jumped around through all the different difficulty settings, and it's just an enjoyable experience. It's more about like what you want to experience it. Like, you get difficulty modifiers here for going up to even hard. The computer AI gets buffs for their troops, and it gets harder and harder to match what they're able to field in a campaign. Just makes it take longer to complete stuff. So if you want the campaign to be a complete experience and you just finish through the whole thing quickly, then lower difficulties would be for you. If you want a really significant challenge once you're more familiar with the system, higher difficulties might be up your alley. And there are plenty of mods to change how all of this stuff works for all of it. And a plethora of different options and opportunities for anyone not aware. There's like a workshop available for all that stuff online through Steam Workshop. It's great, quite enjoyable. So I think I'll just get started and go over the basics as we go in, and I'll try to leave the narration from voice acting to let it all play out first for this initial entry into the series. Vampires, greenskins, and beastmen alike are right to run from the field when King Luin Liancourt, the Lionhearted, charges into the fray in his noble hippogriff, Bequi, for their doom is surely at hand. Wearing the blessed crown of Bretonnia and wielding the legendary sword of Couronne, forged from exquisite Bretonnian silverine, the recently crowned King Luin comes to smite evil from his lands with the eternal blessing of the Lady of the Lake. Oh man, I love Bretonnia. I'm a sucker for anything that's King Arthur-esque storyline-wise. I'm excited. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and finally glad that I'm starting now. Load times can be significant. I'd recommend that if you have the option I would suggest installing this game on a solid state hard drive. It'll dramatically improve your load times.
Greetings to you, benevolent Royak. Blessed is your rule over Bretonnia. Yet darkness spreads from abroad and threatens your kingdom. The threat is real. It must be faced. To the east, the greedy merchant princes of Marienburg conspire to consolidate their riches. Observe that much wealth flows into Marienburg, but very little emerges. Further south, in the Grey Mountains, greenskins and dwarfs vie for control of the peaks. Whoever wins may yet cause trouble for you, my lord. Beyond, the wood elves in their mysterious forest protect their homes. Whilst at the coast, the Duke of Bordello is as unpredictable as the roiling sea, and as secretive as the watery depths. Elsewhere, the unliving lords of Musilon wage war against mortal men. The bickering dukedoms ignore the looming threat, and so it falls to you to act, my liege. Only a united Bretonnia can face these growing perils. Raise your banner, King Leoncoeur, and drive this evil from the world in the lady's blessed name.
Okay, cool. As soon as I were to click this, I think it'll start another voice line, but I'll just give a brief overview of what they're trying to suggest here for how they play. The vows and troths are significant. Oh, okay, yeah, and it's bringing up a little question mark. So if you're playing the game for the first time, or you're just playing it and you're not familiar with something, usually when you take your mouse and hover it over an object in the game, it will bring up information related to that object. So just as an example here, I'm hovering over the peasant economy. It's bringing up information related to that. And we'll get back into that later. But yes, if you want to know more about things here in these, they're sort of like almost like a hyperlink, where if you click on this thing, it brings up another bit of information over there. So you feel free, if you're actually getting into it yourself, you can dig into some of the material. And some of it's lore based, and other parts of it are describing mechanics of the game itself. It's pretty interesting. So, pledging themselves to all that is pure and good, lords and ladies can adopt the vows or troths of Bretonnia to seek out the Grail or serve the lady. And that's a mechanic that comes into play and does a variety of effects for lords that you control as you're playing, and the lords act as the commanders to your armies. Chivalry is another mechanic. It's specific for Bretonnia, where chivalry is won or lost through honorable or dishonorable acts. Benefits are conferred on Bretonnian factions as their chivalry increases, or could decrease. This is not stated here, but your current chivalry is located up here. We'll get into that later. Yeah. The Green Knight is a summonable here, and if you're hovering over a section about topic and one of these little how they play kind of menus, they'll have a flashing highlight over the thing that they're trying to describe or reference here. In this case, the Green Knight may be called upon at times to assist in the defense of the realm. Peasants. The Bretonnian peasants primarily work the land, but may instead be drafted to fight in battles. Doing so may cause income to suffer, however. And you could click here to learn more about Bretonnia, but I'm hopefully going to fill in some of the gaps of your knowledge about them.
My lord, the Dukes of Bretonnia have resided under a chivalrous code for many years. Honor this tradition, build upon the great foundations of Gilles le Breton, and lead the knightly orders forward to glory.
Okay, thanks, advisor. I'll do just that. So, we can see here that we've been issued a quest. It doesn't really say that it's a quest, but this is a quest here. World events. Chapter objective issued, the Errantry War. The first bit of the Errantry War, indicating that there might be more. Yes, so we have a quest now, and it'll be part of the other UI that I'll explain in a minute. So I'd like to take a 12 o'clock down through and chronologically sequentially go through each of the different parts of the UIs to familiarize you with what the different things are and what they do in general. So at the top 12 o'clock of the screen, we've got the treasury indicated up here by a little icon showing a treasure chest with some gold in it or something, and then a number indicating how much you have of that thing. And different factions, different races will have perhaps a different resource here. A lot of them share the same thing of gold being your resource of your tax income, as it were here. I guess it's being referred to as income, but this is gold for Bretonnia and most other factions in the game. So if you click on this button, it'll toggle the treasury, and there is a hotkey for it as well. So the minus on your keyboard. Bring that up, and it's one of the other things you can change the hotkey for if you were so inclined. And it'll give you a summary here with some basic information of how much gold you're getting, how much gold you're spending. If it's in green, that's income. If it's red, it's going out. Right now, the trade is currently grayed out because we don't have any trade agreements. And then you could go over here to details to learn more about, like, oh, well, what do you mean I'm getting X amount of income? I want to know more about it. Where's that income coming from? As you get into the campaign, you can fiddle through here to figure out more about, like, where exactly your money is coming from and where it's going to, things like that. Moving over through the rest of this top menu here, we've got the chivalry details, and you can learn more about, like, what your, perhaps if you're playing a different faction, your unique faction mechanics will very often, I think almost universally, be displayed up here at the top of the screen, and you can learn more about what that unique mechanic is and how it functions by reading through this if you wish to. And then this is a representation of how much chivalry you have. If you hover over each section, it'll tell you more about, like, what happens when you hit so like right now I'm in this 0 to 399, and if you jump up to 400 chivalry or above up to the 799, this is what'll happen to your faction as you have that quantity of that resource, in this case chivalry. And the more and more you get, the better. The more benefits you will reap the rewards of having. Oh, and this little section here of the UI will update when there are specific events happening in the world. Sometimes you'll get, like, a plague will happen, and it'll show up here that, oh, there's a plague globally happening to all of your stuff, or maybe every player, every faction in the whole map will be experiencing something that's a truly global thing, or it could be just something that's happening to your own faction. And as those things happen, there'll be a little icon over here you can hover your mouse over to learn more about what that thing is, just in case you happen to forget, and how many turns something is active will be displayed up here as well. And then further for the faction specific stuff, in this case Bretonnia has the peasant economy that's displayed up here, and if you're playing some other faction, something similar will be displayed if you have a faction effect or mechanic that interacts on the global campaign. And in this case, for the peasant economy, it just shows you that you have a certain amount used and then available. And if you go up to the point where it reaches the maximum, in this case 10, you'll enjoy the benefits of the peasant economy being, like, set, right? If you go above that, you'll start to incur penalties, and you'll see that this information all changes. So instead of your farms are working at full capacity, it will change and update it to something else totally different. And most of the time, this top menu is filled with a whole bunch of information. Some of the factions can be extremely detailed. There's a lot of info up there. In this case, Bretonnia is moderate. I think it's kind of like middle of the road. It's not too complex. Hopefully this is all pretty understandable and palatable information. So, like, you know, for the gold and stuff, as you take actions on the campaign and win battles, for example, or collect, if you capture resource areas and get more resources from those areas by controlling more territory, you'll get more and more gold, hopefully. Or if you hire a whole bunch of troops, it'll cost a bunch of the gold or whatever resources to maintain those troops. So up here in the top right of the UI for the campaign, we see that we have a series of different buttons, and if you hover over each of one of the options, it'll tell you more about what each of those different things are and what they do. We've got missions and quests, but we have 0 for that. We don't currently have any missions or quests. I guess this isn't actually a quest, it's just a chapter objective, or overall guiding the player through the campaign. And as we get quests, that'll pop up over here, and the icons similar to, although not identical to, some of the other stuff down here. And there's ways to approach it in different angles and directions, ways to navigate that section. And we have events where it'll show you what happened this turn, what events happened. And right now we're just starting a brand new campaign, so it's showing you, oh, this is the thing that just popped up before. So if you're playing in the campaign in any given turn and you want to know more about like something and you had clicked away from it, it'll usually will show up in the world events in some section over here. And as the events get populated more and more, there'll be various other sections that will show up here, and you can hit the plus or minus sign to pull out the menu or drop it back down to condense it so that you can read through the rest of the information as it starts to pile up. And then over to the next button, we've got Lords and Heroes. And as you control more and more lords, which then control an army, that will be displayed under this section, and it'll get populated and get very, very full later on in the campaign. And it's just a way to sort of navigate through what you have, and another way to look at stuff in the campaign instead of having to pan your camera over and find what that specific thing is and click on it. You could simply double click on an entry here in this Lords and Heroes section, and your camera will automatically pan to it.
What is your behest?
Next section over, we've got provinces. So in this case, it'll show you your provinces, how many you control, and give you a little bit of information about what is happening in that province. So if you hover over each one, it'll give you a little bit more information, like I was saying. Or in this case, the control details, it'll show you what's happening. It's showing in a little red arrow that it's going down. So yes, in fact, it is going to be going down, projected for next turn, where you're getting a +2 from the buildings in this province, but then -4 from the taxes. And the total change then by doing the equation is -2. And that makes sense. It's pretty intuitive, pretty cool way to give a glance of like, as you control maybe a dozen different areas, you'll see if it's a green arrow, then it's going up. If it's a red arrow, it's going down. And this little face icon will change. Instead of gray as it's neutral now, it'll get yellow and then red as it gets closer and closer to being a problem. If it gets all the way down to 0, or -100, I should say, it starts off at 0 as neutral. If it gets down to -100, then you would have a revolt occur. And an incursion, as it were. And then just information about how much gold, the wealth and income section here will give you some details if you hover over it, but at a glance, it'll just show you how much that specific province is giving you as a total. And then you can see a little bit of information about all the other provinces and that are available that you've discovered or you can see. So like when you start a campaign, depending on what legendary lord you pick and where you start, it will give you like information about the stuff that's local to you. So like I know about Marienburg, or the Wasteland province, that's the name of the province here. And Marienburg itself is just one region in this province. And I happen to start off next to it by playing this legendary lord. And it'll give you information about that. We're like, oh, this is how much gold it's a lot more gold than I'm getting. So maybe I should take that. And that's part of my plan here is to end up taking that one. But you can click on these little arrows here to sort the information based on, in this case, sort by province wealth, and it'll list stuff, and you can toggle it to list it ascending or descending. And then same thing with the other options. You can sort it by faction, what faction does what, or sort it by name alphabetically here. At any rate, moving on. So you can learn a little bit more about what all the different factions are, the ones that you've discovered anyway. And they'll be listed here, as well as it's available from another menu that I'm more familiar with and I'm more used to using. But I guess this is another way to approach it that I hadn't really considered using too much. Could be useful. So as we get into one of these other next sections, we can get into what the factions are and how they function and cover the way diplomacy works a little bit. Up here in the top right section, there's a button that we can press here. Hovering over it first, it will give you a little bit of information about like what your faction does. In this case, we picked Lou and Leoncourt, and from the campaign and legendary lord selection, but way back out in the main menu, it gave you some of this information here. But like when you're in the game, if you happen to forget, you can click up here or hover your mouse over there and learn more about it. Or once you've clicked on that little button, it'll bring you up this review panel of like a summary of like information about what your faction's doing, what your situation is, like how many of your heroes you've used for your capacity and what you have available for that, and then a little bit of information that you can discern from other menus, but it's all sort of like as a summary in here for the diplomacy. And then details about like your income and economy is sort of like splashed up here too, just in case the other stuff wasn't useful enough. You could learn more about stuff over here. Once again, then yeah, the faction effects are listed over here too, and hovering your mouse over it will give you information about that. And then suitable climates, information about like, oh well, these are the territories that you might want to go after because they're suitable for you. Unpleasant though you'll get a penalty going after areas where that. So like as an example here, the suitable climate, one of them would be listed here. It's a green circle indicating that it's an area that would be good for your faction to go for, whereas an unpleasant climate, the one in between, would be incurring these types of penalties if you're hovering your mouse over it. So like -1 control, the construction cost is more expensive to build things here, casualty replenishment, so like how quickly your army will recover if it suffered losses, that will be reduced in an unpleasant climate. So anything in this region will suffer that type of situation. Construction time is increased, so like buildings will simply take longer to be constructed. If something would take 2 turns, because this has a modifier plus 50%, it would then take 3 turns, so on and so forth. And then your income that you would collect from, if you have a gold generating or wealth generating building in this province, it would be reduced by a specific amount because it's unpleasant. And then following that logic, if one were to go to an uninhabitable one, it gets even worse. The modifiers for that, yeah, we have some uninhabitable climate in range here. So pretty significantly undesirable climate here is this uninhabitable climate. -3 control as opposed to the -1. Construction cost is a whopping plus 50%. Casualty replenishment rate is an abysmal -15%, so you'll barely get any replenishment rate at all. It's not super intuitive or well explained as to how the replenishment rate works, but even just a 2% increase is a pretty substantial jump, and maybe you'll get 10 troops back per turn will be replenished at a standard replenishment rate, and jumping it up to plus 2% all of a sudden gives you 4 or 15 more instead of just the 10. Just as an example, a rough estimate about troops and stuff like that. So anytime you're getting a negative modifier is pretty significant, especially when it's a whopping -15%. And then some of these other events that can pop up over here, as I was saying earlier, for this top section, where they'll be listed up here as you start a new turn, an event could happen where you get even more casualty replenishment rate reduction from certain events, or maybe an increase or something like that. But that's just how stuff like that goes in this game. Growth is reduced in this uninhabitable climate. Construction time is increased. Recruitment duration is increased. So like if you're trying to recruit new troops, it'll take longer over here than anything that's in an uninhabitable climate. And there isn't really a way around that innately for the local stuff that's happening there. And it's just not a good place for your faction to be there, unless you really want to take over that territory and stop your opponents from having access to it. It's not advisable to go for those areas until you've conquered other areas and have a more stable base of operations and more habitable or suitable climate, as it were. Oh, okay, yeah. So we've got the mini map over here. Is another way to sort of like see around the map. As I'm panning around and moving the camera around, we can see that it's updating the position on the mini map as well. And then I think, yeah, if you use your mouse wheel as the standard option for it, you can mouse wheel backwards to zoom out, mouse wheel forward to zoom in. Pretty standard for a lot of games like this. Same thing like that on the actual campaign map itself. And then there's a couple different options for moving the camera around. You can, if you have the option for it set, it's one of the things you can pick. And I think it's campaigns, no, under controls. Yeah, controls. Mouse scroll. If you have mouse scroll enabled, similar to RTS games, you can bring your mouse to the side of the edge of the screen and it will pan the camera around. But additionally, instead of WASD being movements that you could press on your keyboard to have your character move as if it was an FPS game, you instead have the camera panning around in that direction, which kind of breaks the convention of RTS games, because usually pressing A would be attack move, but there isn't, even in battles, there isn't something that's similar to attack move for that. But at any rate, yes, you could play around with some of the settings for even change the way that some of the hotkeys are pressed. But I do encourage getting used to and familiar to the WASD, or the keyboard commands and hotkeys in general. Speaking of hotkeys, some of these other frequently used sections of the UI have hotkeys associated with them. In this case, technology, for example, is hotkey 8. So the little bracketed either number, or it could be a letter, will be what'll happen if you press that associated key on your keyboard. Will do that action when you have something else selected that does something. So I was saying, going around 12 o'clock and onward, we'll take a look at the different buttons and functions down here in the lower right hand part of the screen. So we have the technology screen. All of the different factions that you play will have a totally different technology tree to climb and research different things to give your faction benefits and effects. And each turn that you take in the campaign, or turn 1, if I were to go to turn 2, it will tick down one of these. So then instead of 5, it'll go down to 4, and then 3, and then so on and so forth until the technology completes, and then you gain that benefit permanently for the rest of the campaign. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, and you can hover over each thing to learn more about like how they all function and things like that. My recommendation is to go for, or at least for Bretonnia, to go for economic investment, and that type of blanket idea of you want to improve your economy kind of follows through for just about all the different races and factions and legendary lords that you could play, where you could focus on a specific thing that's more military based if you wanted to, but perhaps a little bit more game experience under your belt would give you a better understanding of like where you'd want to go and sit to. So like for Bretonnia, for example, there's a way to gain confederations with other friendly Bretonnian factions through the tech tree, which is unique to Bretonnia. Most of the other factions in the game, to my understanding, as I have not played through every single one, they don't have this advantage of being able to confederate friendlies as easily. And it's one of the strengths of Bretonnia, is the fact that they get, not only do they get benefits from confederating friendly Bretonnians, they also can do it more easily because they can simply research the technology to do that. But researching the technology is also an opportunity cost, because then you're not focusing on your economy, so you have less resources. But then you're gaining territory that could be boosting your resources that you have available. So it's sort of like a give and a take. I have some general tips and strategies for that and overall, but I've found that it's been more useful to wait for the territory to be developed and grown more by that faction that originally controls it, and then confederate them later, because you'll have access to the same level of their upgrades as they have them at that point when you do the confederation. And whereas opposed to as if you were to take over a province militarily, it will degrade the quality of the province itself, and it'll like take away some of the growth that had happened there. And ideally you would confederate it at the maximum level. So like your provinces will start off at level 1 and they can go up to level 5. So tier 5, so tier 1, tier 2, so on and so forth. The higher the better. And ideally, yeah, you would control these at the maximum level. And if you were to take over a territory, as it was saying, it actually lowers the tier. So if it was tier, go back here for an example, if it was tier 3 and you attack it and you win the battle there at that province, it would go down to tier 2. And then if it was tier 2, consequently, then it goes down to tier 1, so on and so forth. Whereas as opposed to confederation, you just get it at whatever that level is. So if it was 5, you get to keep it at 5. Good stuff. So as mentioned earlier, the Green Knight is a summonable feature here. That's, if you click this button, once he's available, it would summon him instantly at whatever the location is next to your legendary lord. In this case, it would be Lewin Liancourt. And if Lewin is incapacitated, as he's a legendary lord, and all legendary lords are essentially immortal, where they will come back even if they were killed in battle. They're not actually killed, they're just quote-unquote wounded instead. In the case of the Green Knight summon for Bretonnia, and if your legendary lord is incapacitated for whatever reason and like taking a breather, in a couple turns they'll be available again, kind of thing. The Green Knight will then be summoned at your capital, wherever your capital is located. So if the capital standard here is for Bretonia's Couronne, and if you happen to lose Couronne and your capital moves somewhere else, that's where the Green Knight would show up. At any rate, moving, he's okay. He's a pretty minor character in the grand scheme of things overall, but it's pretty cool. First time going through it, quite enjoyable to have him. So the objectives section, this is where quests will show up too. And I was like, oh, well, what about quests? I think quests will show up. I've been playing a bunch of Warhammer 3 and they changed the way the UI worked for a couple of things here. So like maybe the quests won't show up as readily, but as we get quests, I'll try to reference. I'll like, oh, hey, that thing now has XYZ. So over here, the big button in the middle will start to change depending on what else happens, whereas all the rest of the stuff that I've been discussing kind of stays static unless it's a numerical counter here for like your peasant economy and your gold. But it's like it won't let you change to the next turn until you either skip the notification that's popping up or you need to resolve it. And clicking on this button here will help you zoom your camera to wherever the thing that needs to be resolved is located. So if you're over here somewhere else and you're like, oh, I want to end my turn, the game will be like, oh, by the way, are you sure you don't want to move your lord? However, as you get more comfortable with the game, this button down here, the notification settings, you can toggle and change around all of these different things to like, oh, if you have low money and you don't want to be told that you have low money, you're like, oh, thanks, buddy. I don't care if I have low money. I know that I have low money. Let me work on it. You could toggle that off if you're getting annoyed by any one of these. And in the case of Bretonnia, you can end up with a lot of lords. And if you haven't moved a lord during the turn, you'll keep getting this notice for each separate lord that hasn't been moved. And that can get a little bit annoying. So you could toggle that off. I'm in fact going to toggle it off because I'm currently familiar with and comfortable with how that works. But if you're newer to this, I'd recommend maybe leaving it on until you're like completely convinced. You're like, no, I've got it. I understand that the Lord hasn't been moved. I'll go and get it. But even myself, I've had situations where it has helped, but in the campaigns that I've played, I've gotten many dozens of lords and it can get annoying. So feel free to play with that as you wish. So, okay, I did skip the first notice and it brought me to the, okay, my hero isn't close, so I have a hero over here as well. And then next one, I skipped over that one because I had clicked the skip notification thing and it brought me to the next one. And the next one was like, oh, hey, the settlement upgrade is available. And the settlement upgrade will bring that up over here. Okay, it does click and it automatically zooms the camera to it. The settlements themselves, if you are just not selecting anything, it'll just be like this for the UI, but as soon as you click on a settlement, it'll bring up this next menu over here, which we'll discuss, and it'll show you details of like the settlements themselves. Information related to the province in general is listed over here in the lower left corner. Information more about like stuff as you hover over it will start to pop up and populate the UI with a pop-up menu over there in the left-hand side of the screen. And you can learn all sorts of information about all of these things if you wanted to learn more about it and you're like, oh, well, what's that thing mean when I hover my mouse over towards that direction to learn more about it? The menu goes away. Well, bring up the building browser, and the building browser allows you to sort of like see a little bit more about what that thing is. And even though hovering your mouse over it doesn't directly give you information on, at least for this part of the UI, you can still at least get a better example of what it is without having the distraction of the campaign map in the background. And then all of these different buttons down here have various effects and things. So like just the general overview is the first section that you're at, and then you can learn more about like what the garrisons are for each of the different regions and provinces. So like this section here, the town itself, city as it were, Couronne, has a garrison of this. And these are the troops that are inside of this that will fight if that city comes under attack. And likewise, Langui over here, this other small minor province that we have, also has its own garrison. And then the building browser, as I clicked in there, it lets you click here on the name of whatever the province is to change to that building section. So it's like if I click on this and then hit building browser, it'll be for Couronne. And so same thing for Langui. If I click on Langui and then hit building browser to bring that up. But you can switch back and forth between the ones that are in the province over here like that. And as you gain more territories, more provinces and regions, you can select the next one that's available by clicking here or here. There's arrows up here, and then there's a hotkey associated with the period or the comma will let you quickly switch between them. But I'm pressing my period keyboard and clicking. I don't have any other provinces, so it goes from province to province and lets you see all the different regions that are in that province. It's a pretty cool way to navigate and can help cut down on the micromanagement and panning your camera to the next one and clicking that thing and then clicking the building browser if you were to own it, in this case Castle Artois. Same thing works for characters. So in this case I selected the hero, but I do have an option here for the select next, and it'll pan between heroes and your lords or your armies, as it were. Heroes can act as independent agents out of the field, and the lords can have heroes in their army, but the lords essentially can't do campaign actions out on the field, whereas heroes can do specific actions that are unique to them, and each different faction that you play has a whole different set of abilities that are available to them, some of which will be listed over here. But as you get more used to what each of the different things do, you'll get a better understanding as you play more. So in this case, like if I have this hero selected, it'll tell me what abilities are here from the target. So I could target a settlement to steal technology, and it says reduces research time for 3 turns. But what that'll do is it'll give you a bonus for your research rate. Not super intuitive the way that it's described over here. If you do this targeted action onto an enemy settlement, or if I targeted another hero, I could wound that hero that I'm targeting, and that'll have a chance to do that. And if you have, I don't think there's another hero available in visual range right now. Just taking a look around. Yeah, there isn't another hero available. But if you have the hero selected and you try to right click on something, it'll tell you what each of the different available actions are. So like if there was a hero here, I could have targeted just that hero. But in this case, since there wasn't a hero, it gives me the option to do the block army effect, which is one of the other targeted abilities. Army, block army. So it would reduce the amount of distance that army could move on the campaign map during their turn if I was successful in using that hero to take that action. Speaking of movement, if you have a hero or the armies selected and they've got their full movement capacity, the movement range, it'll be represented here in this little visual readout of it. The more full this bar is in yellow, the more movement they have available. And if you hover your mouse over it, it'll show you a percentage of how much their movement range is remaining. And as you start to move on the campaign, it will reduce it. And before you do the movement itself, if you have the army or hero selected, and you right click and hold and move to different spots on the map, so the arrow pointer would be where your troop would end up when you release the right click, it will show you on the lower left hand side of the screen of what percentage of your movement would be remaining after taking that action. And if you're ever not quite sure about what you're wanting to do, or you changed your mind while thinking about like where you're going to do it before you release the right click, to cancel the movement, you would then hit left click at the same time as still remaining with the right click held down, and it will cancel that action most of the time. So if you happen to be playing with like say a wireless mouse, or your mouse is a little bit older and it's not registering your clicks very well, it could potentially fail, and it will just, by left clicking at the same time, your system might not register that you're still holding down the right click, and it would make your character move. So that could be kind of problematic because in the current version of the game, there isn't a way to rewind and take your turn over. So if you're a brand new player, the first thing I would recommend doing before taking any actions is to go and save your game. So you can press escape to bring up the menu, or I'll go over that next section as we get on to the rest of the UI components of where they're located. But just simply do a save of your campaign. You can name it whatever you want. The default name of Corone 1 will be what we're saving this as for now. So let's see. There's a lot more to go over for this other stuff down here. I'll come back to it. But now that I've mentioned that the menu thing, I'm compelled to give more information about it. So like if you just press escape, as most other games are, it'll bring up the game options menu, and then you can change the options, like all the stuff that we were changing in the start screen, the before we started into the campaign itself. So you can change a lot of these things. But like I was saying, that even changing this unit size here won't change anything when you're in the campaign itself. But a lot of the other options will work, but it'll prompt you to restart it and have to reload it. So it's better to get it all out of the way as you can. But if there's some sort of problem when you're running your campaign, you're like, oh, quality isn't high enough, you can come back in and change most of it. And most of it should work in your current session, but some of it might might require you to restart the program itself entirely. So it's basically all the same settings over here. And then if you happen to be playing this multiplayer, the chat option would allow you to give a text message chat to someone else. But if you've managed to hook up a multiplayer game with somebody else in this and the campaign, the chances are that you're communicated with them outside, perhaps on your phone, text messaging or something like that, at very least. Or something like through Discord or something like that. But so this is a pretty antiquated way to communicate with other folks, but it's there as an option in Warhammer 2. And then if you're ever lost about information here, the advisor is reachable by a little click on this button over here. I guess there isn't a hotkey associated to that, whereas there is for the menu and chat. But the advisor can pop back out. And if you've missed something and you want to go back to like what had been said in the past, you can replay it. And then you can go back through and each different entry of the advisor's messages can be replayed there. And once you're satisfied, you click the check mark to give it away. And if you're ever lost in the campaign, or not really sure what you're doing, trying to like learn more about it, and stuff that you've researched outside of the game isn't helping, there is an in-game bunch of information, and some of this other stuff that I was looking at before, the hyperlink thing would bring you to this section, but you can navigate up here where the question mark is for the help pages, and there's a super useful information in here to learn more about like what each of the different things are. So in this case, the rituals won't really be pertinent for this campaign because of the Mortal Empires, and the rituals are related to the Vortex campaign itself primarily. I guess you can move this all around. If you weren't satisfied with it being all in the upper right corner of the screen, you can have this over here and read to the lower left or something. Pretty useful. I haven't really gone out of my way to use it that much because I've played so many other Total War games before going into this one. But if you'd like to learn more about it, there's plenty of information there. Speaking of plenty of information, this might be a little overwhelming here, but the spell browser would let you look at all of the different spells for all of the different lores of magic in the game. And there's quite a few of them. Quite a few indeed. And it'll show like a little animation and an example of what the spell would look like when the spell is cast. So like spellcasters, there's a wide variety of them. A lot of different spells. And if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, that's okay. You could just maybe learn more about what your specific faction has available to you. In the case of Bretonnia, there are 3 different spellcasters. 3 different lores of magic, that as is. So like if we've just taken a look at this hero here, we'll see that it says damsel and then in brackets heavens. So I have the heavens lore of magic. And if we go back up to the spell browser, we can click down to the lore of heavens. I happen to know that this is what the icon is here. So you can go through and look at each one. And if you hover your mouse over it, it'll tell you what each of the ones are for the lores. In this case, you could learn more about that if you really wanted to learn what the spells were for the lore of heavens and so on and so forth. And for Bretonians, you get access to the lore of life and the lore of beasts as well. There's a lot to dig into there if you wanted to, but instead of looking at every single one, maybe just take a look at the ones that you have available to you for your specific faction that you've picked and you're playing. Yeah, in the case of Bretonnia, like I was saying, the beasts is here, and then life. Probably the strongest lore of magic in the game. Bretonnia gets it. Yay! Here's all the information about life and what'll happen if you upgrade the spell to the overcasted version of a spell. It'll cost more and have a bigger effect. But also have the chance of miscasting. So anytime a miscasted spell happens, instead of just casting it, it will cast the spell, but it will also cost a bunch of the HP on your character's HP pool.
I serve the lady.
So for my hero, it's not really showing in the Warhammer 2 UI. In Warhammer 3, there's a button you can toggle between showing the hero's general abilities or then the hero's specific stats. But at least in Warhammer 1 and 2, there is a way to click to show the details of whatever the hero is in question. And at that point, it will bring up the information related to what the actual stats are for your hero. So yeah, like I was saying, if you miscast a spell, it'll deplete your HP pool, just like an attack would. If your hero gets attacked by something, it would lose HP. You could also lose your own HP by miscasting some of your spells or something like that. So in here's all of the information related to the stats of the units, and there's a lot of stuff to cover for that. We can get into that in a little bit, but oh, cool. This hero happened to spawn in with a highly desirable trait, one of the best ones that are available, at least for Bretonnia, that are pretty universally well received in other factions as well. This is a nice feature. So like anytime you start a brand new campaign, the hero that you get will typically spawn in with a random effect. If it's a generic hero, in this case, this is a generic hero, even though she's got her own name, she's generic. But she happened to spawn with a great trait. And that's one of the reasons that I keep replaying these games, is it's a random thing. You don't know what you're going to get when something happens. So like when a character levels up or you win a battle. The character, when you win a battle, any character that's involved has a chance of leveling up, and every time you level up, you have a chance to gain an item or follower or some sort of special thing. And you don't know what you're going to get. Each time it pulls from a random pool of things, so you can end up with armors and weapons and special magical things like that. Good stuff, good stuff. Okay, so for the lower left-hand corner of the screen, when you've clicked on something like that, it'll bring you all sorts of information related to that thing that you currently have selected. And that'll change depending on what you have selected, right? Of course, the information that'll come up when you have a province or region selected, that is, it will be up over here and related to all the stuff for their province. And in this case, for the hero, it'll give you information like what the hero does here for the info panel that popped up, but it'll also let you, like I was saying before, the movement range is displayed, what rank they are will be displayed, but then there's character details, there's buttons that you can click to interact, and I've done it a couple times, but just a simple left click will bring up that type of stuff. And in the case of the details menu, as you get more and more effects happening on your hero as they level up and different things happen in the campaign, that'll all be listed up over here, and you can learn more about what each of those things are by simply taking a look and like, oh, okay, well, if I have this hero in here, the battle effects are all the units that are in the army. If the hero is attached to an army, will be listed here under the battle effects. It's pretty cool. And then the skills, there's almost as in-depth as the technology tree. Each character has his own set of skills available. So as the character levels up and gets experience, let's see if there's a way to display it over here. Okay, so the current experience, hovering over this section of it, or over here, it'll show what character's current rank is and how many skills they put into specific skill lines, whereas there's yellow, red, and blue, and each of those different colors are associated with a different line of the skills. And in this case, it's not showing because everything's grayed out, but the character skills will be under one section. That's all the stuff up here that's yellow. The battle skills will be if they have battle effects to affect the army. And then the campaign skills will be all this blue stuff down here. And then also it's for character skills for spells, that'll be quote unquote yellow. But in the case of a lord, if you have the lord selected, it'll have a different set of stuff, where this is the red section for the battle skills that affect all the troops that are in the army. And there's a lot of stuff here. You can hover your mouse over and learn more about each separate entry, and I can kind of guide you through some of the stuff that I'll be picking at first, but yeah, don't get overwhelmed. It's a linear progression where if you start off in the left side of the screen, and as you put points into it, you get higher and higher up into the tree. So like here, if I wanted to get access to Foe Seeker, it'll say that available after spending 4 skill points into a previous group. And that means that anything that's here in this rectangle here is considered part of that group. So you just put 1 and then 2, 3 and 4, total of 4 and then you would gain access to go up to the next level. It's not too complicated. And if you make a mistake as to what you're putting your point into, you can, before you exit this screen, you can hit this reset skill points for whatever you've spent up to that point in that session there. But as soon as you exit that screen, whatever decision that you've made, if you have clicked on any one of those skills, it will permanently leave that skill picked. So be careful with what you pick, because there isn't a way to respec all of your skills like a lot of other RPGs have available. There are mods that you can use through like the workshop and everything. If you pick the mod, you can respec your heroes perhaps as many times as you want, or like a one skill respec or one time respec thing, I think is another mod out there. So Lewin Leoncourt is similar to a lot of the stuff that's available through, like, say, I was showing as an example for the damsel here over here. But the Lewin Leoncourt also has another section over here, the vows. So like as part of the like how they play section at the very beginning of this presentation, the chivalry and things like that, and stuff related to Bretonnia, it's their unique mechanics. And in the case of lords, you have all the different vows to pick. And Lewin Leoncourt starts with all of the vows unlocked, but all of the other lords that you would pick, except for, say, the legendary lords, would start out with not having any of the vows done or completed. And to complete them, you would have to complete a series of, here, I'll summon a new lord so we can get an example of what those things are and what they do. We'll go back through how to do that in a minute. But in the case of this new lord over here that I summoned, so I could get the Trough of Protection here, and you can read a little bit of lore about that and then pick what each of the different troughs are as an option. So as soon as you click this, it permanently locks that character to that trough. So be careful before you click here that you're comfortable with completing the way this has to, this requirement is. So like once you pick this one, it opts you out of being able to complete the other two ways to complete this trough in this case. So if you wanted to research 5 technologies that would complete this trough, and the technologies can take quite a while to complete, like just this first one will take 5 turns, and then another, so 11 turns before this next one. So it could take a very, very long time to complete the trough. If just 3 of them could take 17 turns. So like it'll take a very, very long time in some cases to complete the knowledge one. So I'd recommend against picking that first one here, in this case for Bretonnia. The Pledge to Order is significantly easier to complete because anytime a building completes in that region that that character is located in, you would step up 1 rank in that one. In this case, it only takes a single turn to complete something like a simple structure like the fields here. So that can be an easy way to do it. Or the most common one that I like to use is if I've summoned a character like a lord, I'm probably going to use it in combat a lot and have it involved in stuff that will gain a lot of experience, and therefore allowing that character to level up pretty quickly. So just simply ranking up or leveling up 5 times, it will complete that first quest. So I'm going to pick that one, and it'll show you, once you've picked the one of them, it'll show you a readout of how many ones you've completed. So each one of these squares will fill up with a color. I think it's yellow here to represent that you've completed step 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. And then completing any one of these troughs, or I guess in this case, they're all troughs for prophetesses, and their vows for the male, the lords, or as opposed to the ladies, they're troughs. They're the same types of requirements. It'll be the same thing to either research 5 technologies or something like that. They're just, it's instead of that, it's a trough for the ladies. Go figure. In this case, for the Trough of Protection, you would get greatly reduced income for these types of units. The leadership aura size would increase, which isn't too helpful. And then you get the untainted effect. So like your preferred, in this case for Bretonnia, untainted is the way they would prefer to have their territories. And there's different types of tainted effects that are undesirable. In this case, we could see down here the vile vampires of Musalon are tainting the land with their type of corruption. And it's going directly against the untainted nature of what the territory would have been otherwise. And we don't want vampire corruption in most cases. And having the various vows and troughs completed, at least for the first section, would get you an untainted effect for each one of the lords that you have in a region that has that untainted, and they all add up cumulatively to give a way to negate the effects of corruption here. So we've got Untainted, Chaos Corruption, Vampire Corruption, and Skaven Corruption. Not too many types of corruptions. And after having played Warhammer 3, there's so many more ways to have your lands all corrupted and negative things like that. So yeah, we can see here the local populace, there is a presence of Untainted for the people that just live there innately. And then there is counteracting that quite a bit more vampire corruption, in this case down in Musalong, where the local populace equals out the 1-to-1. And then there's buildings constructed in this territory that are giving a whole bunch of vampire corruption. In this case, we can see here, yeah, +5 for the fortress of Murovec. Sometimes characters too, just like our characters can give Untainted, enemy characters could give more types of corruption of their preferred corruption. And I believe one of the other effects that the damsels will provide for each damsel will give another +2 standard. And one of the skills that you could pick is to increase that value by 1 per skill point. Pretty weak. You can get a lot of Untainted effects from other sources, and it'll start to stack up to the point where spending skills to get that is not so desirable.
Who calls?
Okay, let's see. Moving on. What's some other good information here to cover? I haven't written notes or anything. I'm just sort of like going off the cuff, kind of natural. So probably another good way to cover information related to that is to, I think I kind of skipped over the diplomacy section. It's one of the other buttons over here that I was going to cover earlier, but it's its own thing. There's a lot in this menu to learn about and discern information to parse. So bear with me here. There's I guess it's not a ton of info, but it could be perhaps a lot for somebody that's unfamiliar with this game type, this series in general. But I think it's palatable if you're willing to go step by step and just take one step at a time here. Yeah, so at any rate, when you bring up the diplomacy, it will list everything standard by race, and then all the different races will be listed here. So like, okay, we're Bretonnia, and it lists it all alphabetically. So the next one's alphabetically Dark Elves, so on and so forth, as you get through all the races that you're currently aware of when you start a campaign. And as you discover more and more of them, that'll populate this list with all the other factions and races that you've discovered. And I'm just using the mouse wheel to scroll up and down, or you could click here and drag stuff up and down. And a better way to interact with this menu is if there's, especially later on as you get more and more of the factions revealed, it's kind of condensed down into the small section here, but you can click here in this arrow here and left click and drag it up and expand it quite a bit. And it's much easier to get information for everything that's available here. Little quality of life navigation tip for you. So if factions like you, they'll be closer to green and brighter green as they like you more and more. And factions that don't like you will be from orange down to red. If they don't like you. If they're orange, they're maybe somewhere around neutral. And if you're a specific race, you'll have other races that have an affinity for you or have an aversion towards you. In the case of the Bretonians, every Bretonian likes other Bretonians. Go figure. The Empire don't really have an affinity towards you or against you, but there are certain races that have they like you more often, even if they don't have a specific bonus of an affinity directly. They'll be more likely to just be friendly with you if you're at war with the same factions that they're at war with, for example, and you're positioned in such a way with Bretonnia to be friendly with other humans, or not humanoids, but because the Skaven are very much humanoids, but they are not human. Rat-a-tatas. So in here, it'll list what the name of the factions are, their banner and icon, their relative strength. And well, this bar shows you that this yellow section shows you shows you how strong you are in comparison to them. Their strength is indicated by the red bar. That corresponds with how strong the armies are when they interact with one another as well. The closer you are to filling up this section with your color of you being represented here by yellow here, the more likely you are to be stronger than that opponent, whether it be at the battle here or in this menu. And you can click on any of these arrows here to shift the sort by this specific entry. So like how many settlements these different factions control. The Scourge of Cain, they control 6 settlements. Reichland here controls 5, so on and so forth. And likewise, you can do this for the strength ranking, where it'll show what our strength ranking is here. And we're not in this list here, but you can infer that by rank 12, we're between 13 and 10. Go figure, that's how math works. Funny. And if you hover your mouse over where the attitude, the little face is located over here in this section of it, it'll show you an information readout of like, generally, this is what happened and why they do or do not like you. And yeah, like a lot of non-Bretonnians will have an aversion towards you. And we can go back to races. This is the standard viewpoint for it, and you can kind of get used to stuff in whichever way you're used to. Like if you'd prefer to it just simply all be alphabetical and that you're more comfortable with that, you can list it by that as well. So if you double click on any of the entries, it will bring you into a dialogue that's related to just that specific faction. And by entering into that dialogue, you get a range of options to interact with them. And then currently we don't have anything up because we haven't discussed anything with them. But if you click this button here, it'll bring up all of these different options you can pick from. And if you are seeing these little icons here, the different colors, if it's yellow, a moderate likelihood that chances are they probably won't accept this as if I just hit trade agreement alone. They might or they might not. But if you see anything that's got a green icon here, the chance of likelihood of success, it even says that it's high. Anytime that it's green and the chance of likelihood of success is high, you can probably demand a little bit of a payment of money from them and get something as a kickback from that. In this case, I want to see if I can get both a trade agreement and military access with them, and then get them to pay me some money for doing that. If you have, instead of over here where they're giving you the money, if you could offer them a payment, if they're not like, if it's not green and you're not likely to get that effect if it's yellow or red, if you offer them enough money, it might push them over the edge. So each offering of money that you click up, or you can enter in a specific value, it might change it to them accepting something that they wouldn't have previously accepted. And then before you hit OK, you can modify any of the parts of the deal before it happens. Or if you're like, hold on. Okay, that works and that's high. You can cancel out of the whole thing by just left clicking on the cancel or pressing escape. I think it will bring you back out to another section of the menu. But weights for whether or not things would be well received or not depends a lot on the initial, like what your relation is with that faction to start with, or if you've done actions that that faction is particularly fond of. So like right now I had a treaty when the game started with Lyonese, so they're already going up in relations with me. And the higher this is, the closer this is to green and brighter green, the more likely that the different options will be green options. And the more likely that you'll be able to get money out of doing diplomatic actions with them will be. In this case, I'd like to get a trade agreement and military access. I would highly recommend against doing something like a defensive alliance, especially when you're first starting out in a campaign, because defensive alliances and then especially military alliances can lead you into having problems with your reliability. In the case of if you are allied with a faction, say that if I was allied with Lyonese and then they get declared war on by another faction like the Shrine of Cain, if I don't want to go to war with the Shrine of Cain for whatever reason, and I decline the option to join them in that war, it will lower my reliability. And you want to maintain the highest reliability as possible, because having less than the highest reliability will give the potential for the computer factions to break their various agreements with you, whether or not they be trade is the first one to go away. they'll break the trade agreements with you, or these non-aggression pacts, military accesses, or if you have defensive or military alliances with factions, having your reliability dropped from some other action or something like that will dramatically increase the chances that the other factions will break those agreements, or will do negative things like declare war on you or something like that. So it's in your best interest for just about every faction of the game is to keep your reliability as high as possible. There are factions where you could play like the baddies, as it were, where you could take dishonorable actions or something equivalent thereof, and it's in your best interest to directly go against what I'm saying and like break the alliances and things like that. But that's for you to explore and discover on your own. In here we have some other options to like tell this other faction to break such and such agreement or not break things like that. We can try to influence them, and the higher the attitude is, the more likely these different requests will be to succeed. And sometimes you might have to grease the wheels with giving them a whole bunch of money. Even if they really like you a lot, it's very unlikely that any one of these demands or actions to like tell this faction to do such and such, to break certain agreements and stuff like that, it's very unlikely that even if they really, really like you, that they'll actually do that type of thing. And it's kind of dependent on what the race is in question. So Bretonnians trying to tell other Bretonnians what to do, it will very often succeed. But if you're trying to tell a Skaven or some other hostile faction what to do, they probably won't do it unless they really, really, really like you for some reason. And yeah, stuff like that. Also, you can start to request payments for things from other factions, and the higher their attitude is towards you, the more likely that the request will go through. It's very unlikely that it'll be a value of anything higher than 300. That if you request some gold from another faction, that they'll actually give you anything more than 300, and 300 is the minimum. So you can't, if you were to go 295 or something like that into this window here, it just defaults it back out to the minimum of 300. So every 10 turns or so, give or take, if you've made a request from a faction that really, really likes you, they might be able to give you money again. But in between that, if you've successfully gained money from a faction, did that request, and they actually gave you the money, most of the time they won't give you anything else again for the next 10 turns. I want to say that there's been a couple situations where like 8 or 9 turns have passed since I requested that money and they actually did give me something, but I don't, campaigns go on for long enough and the turns take a while that I'm not totally sure if that was something that actually happened. But yeah, for Bretonnia, the diplomacy is pretty straightforward for other Bretonnians. You want to stay as friendly with them as possible because there are chivalry penalties to going to war with other Bretonnian factions. Like, so if I click here to declare war, before you actually declare the war, if you were to hit OK here, this check mark, it would immediately declare war on that faction. But you can back out before it goes on it. But it'll give you like a relative faction strength in comparison here, just as a reminder, like, oh, this is how strong you are compared to how strong they are. And then, by the way, if you do go to war with them, you'd get branded as a Bretonnian traitor and lose a whole minus 200 chivalry. We only have, let's go back out. We only have 15 chivalry. We go really far into the negative and suffer that penalty of the -5 control for all provinces and -10 for leadership for all armies until we could dig ourselves back out of that. So like, it's definitely not good to go to war with the Bretonnians in most cases. There is a case where going to war with a specific Bretonnian faction would be desirable. The Fey Enchantress down here for Carcassonne. If one were to defeat this legendary lord in combat, you get a trait for plus 10% casualty replenishment rate. And one of Bretonnia's biggest weaknesses is the fact that their casualty replenishment rate is abysmal. And there's very few ways to increase it, like this Pox Shelter plus 2%, 3, and then 4%. That's like it for standard buildings. There's no lord skills. There's only one item that you could get from doing specific actions. It's very annoying to get that item. And then there's another special structure for any place that has the pastures to give you casualty replenishment rate, but it's very, very difficult to get that type of things. And that's the only source outside of like owning a very special, unique building often far, far off into the other part of the map where you're very unlikely to get to in a campaign. This legendary lord here, the Fey Enchantress, is the only source of getting your casualty replenishment rate up higher. So that's like the only time that you'd want to go for the Fey Enchantress is or go to war with a Bretonnian faction is to get that trait. But you certainly don't want to do that at the beginning of most campaigns. I would suggest would be a poor plan of action. There's no reason to go to war with somebody that's neutral or friendly to you, unless you want their territory. And they're pretty far away from my current starting position, so no reason to go after them. So,
What would you have of me?
trying to think of what else to cover here. I've kind of jumped around a little bit back and forth between stuff, and maybe this won't be the best example of what to go into and how to approach this, and I can revise this and redo part of this. But I'm enjoying this experience so far, and it's a pretty fun, relaxing thing for me to do at the time. I'm noticing that the recording length is getting pretty significant though, so this might be a good time to take a break and maybe do some contemplation as to where would be the next best way to approach the rest of this information. So I'll see you in a bit.